The Toronto Raptors shocked the NBA world last season, finishing as the 5 seed in the Eastern Conference, while Fred VanVleet went from undrafted to an All-Star, and Pascal Siakam made an All-NBA team. This is not to mention the fact that Masai Ujiri showed his genius once again, as Scottie Barnes surpassed all expectations and won Rookie of the Year. So with a very successful season behind them, what's next for the Toronto Raptors? Pascal Siakam had the best season of his NBA career, getting back to his elite two-way performances and made All-NBA third team. His mid-range game has added more layers while being more efficient, and his playmaking took big steps forward, asserting himself as a top player in the league. Fred VanVleet has officially gone from undrafted to All-Star after another great season, his first without Kyle Lowry in the backcourt, and although he is still not the playmaker Lowry was in his prime, Freddie did improve his playmaking this season and emerged as the new leader on the roster. OG Anunoby continues to take strides forward on the offensive end year in and year out. This year we saw improvements in his handles, his post moves and scoring with great power moves in the paint, and the ability to create his own shot at times from mid-range. OG has not had a big most improved player breakout like many have expected over the years, but there is no doubt he has made significant improvements on offense over the course of his career. Gary Trent Jr. had a great first season in Toronto, showing more great offensive flashes and making significant improvements to his defense. He was amongst the leaders in the league in deflections, got very good at jumping passing lanes to get steals, and improved as an on-ball defender. Scottie Barnes, well, I can't say enough great things. He surpassed all expectations people had for his rookie season, was an elite versatile defender, a much better shooter than what is expected in his rookie season. He also showed to be a great rebounder, has amazing vision and playmaking with very high upside in that skill set, with legit point forward or even point guard potential moving forward. Precious Achiuwa had a very tough start to the 2021-22 season, really struggling with finishing around the rim. But overnight, throughout the middle of the season, Achiuwa became an excellent three-point shooter. This is while being a good, energetic defender and rebounder, and his finishing did improve over the course of the season. He showed the great upside he has moving forward, and showed why Masai Ujiri wanted to acquire him so much. Chris Boucher also struggled early on in the season. His offense was primarily coming from shooting threes, and he was not hitting them for the first 2 months of the season. But from December forward, he started to shoot much better, back to a acceptable, relatively efficient rate, and started to play with a lot more hustle, improving his rebounding and his ability to attack and finish at the rim, while putting in more effort on defense. He is an unrestricted free agent this summer, and it remains to be seen what his future holds. Thaddeus Young is also a free agent this summer after being acquired at the trade deadline, and he was a valuable veteran depth piece for the Raptors. He provided some good defense and rebounding, and some level of three-point shooting on a team that, although only had bigs off of its bench, still did benefit from another bench piece, especially one that was a veteran. Khem Birch had a fine year in Toronto, but was in and out of the lineup with injuries and was not overly efficient compared to last season. Ultimately, he is a fine bench big, but don't expect him to be a regular starter, and I wouldn't even expect him to start the 28 games that he did this year in next season. Malachi Flynn struggled to find playing time after a solid rookie season, even on a team that had no guard play off the bench at all. He still has upside as a fine playmaker and defender with some scoring ability, who could be a fine backup point guard in the league, but it remains to be seen whether he can get a regular look in the rotation, as he will be competing against 2021 draft selection Delano Banton. Banton had a relatively successful rookie season, as I didn't really expect him to get any NBA minutes, but he did, especially early on in the year. He did fall out of the rotation, but he showed that he has very good defensive upside, with that length at the guard spot being very disruptive, and that length also helped him to be a very good finisher at the rim with fine passing and vision, which made him a very dangerous threat on the fast break, and he certainly could have a future in the NBA. But with that core in mind, a very strong starting core, and a terrible bench, what's the plan for the Toronto Raptors offseason? The Toronto Raptors, in my eyes, have two options headed into this offseason. 1. Be patient and let their young core develop. 2. Try to make a big move for a big, or try to make a big move to just compete now for a title, whether that is acquiring a big or whether it is acquiring some other talent. The Raptors are not in a situation where they are forced into committing to a rebuild or to committing to winning a title. They can simply pick their direction based on what is or is not available to acquire this offseason. Now, they're not going to go for a rebuild regardless, but they can decide to either sit put or to make a big splash and try to reach title contention sooner rather than later. But there is no rush to win now, as Scottie Barnes is still far, far away from his prime, and Freddie and Siakam will still very much be in their prime for the next 3 to 4 years, assuming they both remain on the roster. Not to mention the fact that OG, Gary Trent, and Precious Achiuwa are going to continue to develop. So here's what both options could look like this summer for the Raptors. This is the so-called boring option, but one that could end up being the right choice for the short and long term, especially depending on what is or is not available to acquire this offseason. The Raptors would mainly run it back again with the same group, with Siakam and Barnes playing at the 5 in the starting lineup, with Precious Achiuwa potentially seeing some of those minutes as well. No big trade for a big man or otherwise would be happening. This is not to say that the Raptors wouldn't look for a trade and that they wouldn't be on the phones, but in this case, the option wouldn't be there for them to pull the trigger on an amazing value move, which is typically the only types of moves that Masai Ujiri likes to make. Development of the young players will continue to be a key component of the 2022-23 season, while continuing to be a competitive playoff roster. Scottie Barnes can continue to get more touches and expand his role in the offense, Gary Trent Jr. will continue to improve his game and overall consistency, and Precious Achiuwa can look to round out his game and become a core part of the Raptors' future. I would expect at most only one of Thaddeus Young and Chris Boucher are re-signed. With Khem Birch and Precious Achiuwa already on the roster, there are simply too many front court players. Chris Boucher is likely the most expensive of the two, but I would guess also the most likely to re-sign, as it's worth noting Chris Boucher is from Montreal. After that, the Raptors need to figure out some of their depth. Svi Mykhailiuk and Khem Birch could be used in a trade alongside a pick to add a depth guard or wing, or the Raptors could simply look to free agency to hopefully add some level of depth, as the Raptors cannot play their starters as significant of minutes as they did last season and need some relief from some level of quality on their bench. But the key is, none of the Raptors' core players are traded in this scenario. The continued development of their young players is instead the chosen emphasis. They decide to continue forward with this group without the need to acquire a starting caliber center, as the Raptors look to build a roster that once again becomes one of the most consistent playoff teams in the Eastern Conference. On the flip side, the Raptors could make a splash and push towards being a title contender with a big trade. Teams have expressed interest in acquiring Gary Trent or OG Anunoby, and there is no doubt the Raptors could combine a player with some picks to improve the roster. And of course, as everyone knows, the Raptors are still without a true center. With Rudy Gobert possibly being available, the Raptors could look to acquire Rudy and become a terrifying defense. But in all honesty, most Raptors trade buzz does and always has in the Masai Ujiri era revolved around the fact that other teams want Toronto Raptors players, such as the Siakam trade rumors last year. It's not the case that the Raptors are shopping any individual players, and it's certainly not the fact that the Raptors are leaking out rumors and information. The Toronto Raptors front office is one of the quietest front offices in the NBA. They don't leak out rumors more often than not. They don't really give any indication to what type of moves they could be making, generally speaking. And so most rumors you see about Toronto is other teams wanting to acquire players on Toronto and in turn making that a rumor, not the Raptors front office trying to create rumors. And because of the fact that the interest is much greater from other teams than the Raptors to make a trade, as we will talk more about momentarily, I do not expect any core player of the Raptors to be moved this offseason. So with that in mind, what are my expectations for the Toronto Raptors offseason and moving forward into next season? For this offseason, I do not expect any significant moves unless someone offers Masai an absolutely ridiculous deal that he cannot refuse. Otherwise, Freddie, Gary, OG, and Pascal, I predict, will all be members of the Toronto Raptors for next season. It's not the exciting offseason that some people may like that makes headlines, but it is the path that leads towards more internal development, that leads towards sustained success as one of the regular season playoff regulars in the Eastern Conference. As far as on-court expectations, in the short term, the Raptors will continue to be a playoff team in the East. Not an elite one, but a team that will consistently be in the playoff picture and will be a tough out in the playoffs with upset potential, whether that is as a 5 or 6 seed or whether they come in through the play-in tournament. Long term is where the upside of the Raptors truly lies at a high level. OG Anunoby, Gary Trent Jr., and Scottie Barnes especially are all nowhere near their prime, with OG and Gary Trent being great two-way pieces on a competitive roster, and while for Scottie, the sky is the limit. The ceiling of this Raptors team is the ceiling of Scottie Barnes. The ceiling of this Raptors team is based on the ceiling of Scottie Barnes, and so I would argue the ceiling of the Raptors in the long term is very high and is very promising. And as much as the Raptors will continue to be competitive and try to be competitive, the focus for the Raptors is in the long term, and it is for the prime of Scottie Barnes. That is my thoughts on what's next for the Toronto Raptors. Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more NBA content. Thanks for watching. Peace.